Stacker News gives a new Bitcoin person access to brilliant minds. You earn money by identifying quality posts, and there's only one way to learn what quality is, and that's to go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. There are so many different ways that you can begin earning money on Stacker News. Start snooping around and see who are the successful stackers. Who are the ones who are at the top, who are earning the most? I would immediately go to focus on those people and read their recent posts. It's not totally mercenary either, because what I discovered by doing that, and it sort of came naturally to me, what I wasn't counting on was how much I was learning.
Welcome to another episode of Stacking Sats, my new series devoted to sharing the stories of real people using Bitcoin products and services to stack sats. Today's episode features Siggy47, a retired lawyer and one of the most prolific earners on Stacker News, who has stacked over 500,000 sats for the content that he's created on the platform. Now, before we get into the episode, today's show is sponsored by Voltage. Voltage is the premier provider of Bitcoin and Lightning node infrastructure. Today's show is also sponsored by Stackwork. Stackwork is a Lightning-powered transcription tool that takes the best of AI and humans to create better, faster, less expensive transcripts. And today's show is also sponsored by Nodeless. Nodeless makes it easy to accept Bitcoin payments in your store or website with instant and automatic withdrawals sent directly to your cold storage. You can learn more about Voltage, Stackwork, and Nodeless by clicking the links in the show notes. Siggy47, welcome to Stacking Sats. I am so excited to discuss how you're stacking sats using Stacker News. But first, before we get into that, let's step back and why don't you tell folks a little bit about your background prior to understanding Bitcoin and Lightning?
Sure, Kevin. But before we get started, I just want to say how happy thank you for inviting me, and I really enjoy your podcast. And
happy to hear that.
Hopefully, we can have a good show here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So basically, I'm retired right now. I'm a retired criminal defense lawyer. I practiced for about 38 years. And how I wound up discovering Bitcoin is probably not that unusual, but of course I'm still kicking myself because I'll explain why in a moment. As an attorney, I was very interested in constitutional rights. Obviously, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I got very interested in constitutional issues. This is back when I was in my 20s, practicing law for a few years. And I remember going into a bookstore and discovering a book called Anarchy, State, and Utopia by Robert Nozick. And frankly, that book changed my life in many ways. It introduced me to libertarianism. And, we're familiar in Bitcoin about going down a rabbit hole. I went through a major libertarian rabbit hole. And I'm sure there are many of your listeners are interested in Austrian economics. I got involved studying Ludwig von Mises, Hayek, Murray Rothbard, Henry Hazlitt, and really it became an obsession of mine. As a result of that, I joined the Libertarian Party, and I became very active in my local and state Libertarian Party, which was basically political, a political organization as opposed to philosophical. Although we certainly had our philosophical arguments, and I ran for office a few times, and over the years I got a little disillusioned with the party, with the infighting, with the procedural things which seem so antithetical to libertarianism, frankly, that by around 2010 or 11, I was slowly, I would attend the meetings occasionally, but I sort of faded out of that. And it was at one of those meetings in 2012. Well, one of my friends from the Libertarian Party attempted to orange pill me. And like a fool, at that point, like I said, I was sort of disillusioned with the whole movement, and I basically wrote it off as a scam. I know a lot of people have said that about their initial impressions, but I probably was in a position where I should have learned more about it, and I didn't. So then I forgot about it for a few years, and I've always been an investor. I've had my law practice, but I'm also interested. I was always interested in the stock market, investing, and quite frankly, I guess you can say that my first purchase of Bitcoin was really a number go up type of thing. Where I remember sitting one morning watching CNBC with my wife, and that was in 2017, late fall, early winter maybe of 2017, right about the time where it hit that 19.6 price peak. So it's probably November or December of 2017. My wife turns to me and said, "Why don't we buy a Bitcoin?" And I said to her, "We're going to spend $19,000 on a Bitcoin," and I didn't, but I was intrigued. I
Yeah.
thought it was too expensive, and it wasn't until early 2018 that I made my first purchase, and just in time for that major bear market. So, so
Right.
I think I got in at 15,000. I made another purchase at 11, 13. I made about four purchases in the first 3 months of 2018, and then that was basically it for me.
How
And
did you first discover Stacker News and the Lightning Network after having gone through this, understanding of Bitcoin and having made purchases? Then to step into Lightning, that's like another rabbit hole, and many have not yet made that jump.
uh,
And then Stacker News is its own rabbit hole on Lightning, right?
yeah, Stacker News really was my impetus to learn so much about Lightning, but so much about many other aspects of Bitcoin. I'm not even though I've been around computers probably since the late '80s. I'm embarrassed to admit I'm not great technically, but I became fascinated with it through Stacker News. Now I started going down the rabbit hole in I'd say 2020. I got back in, but it wasn't until May of 2022 that I discovered Stacker News. I was on Reddit, and Reddit was just I didn't know much about Reddit, but it was really terrible, and I was just looking for a place to learn to keep up with Bitcoin news. And at the time, I thought I had enough resources to basically surf the web. I was watching a lot of YouTube videos, Andreas Antonopoulos stuff. I was learning a lot. But in May, I discovered Stacker News, and I was smitten almost immediately. And and at the beginning, I have to admit, you know, I had an awareness at the time about the distinction between KYC Bitcoin, non KYC, and the fact that you can earn sats was for me the initial lure. And just the idea that I could learn sats, I earn sats on the site was very intriguing to me. And so at the beginning, I was stumbling around as I'm sure most people do. Um, I got on there. I the one thing I did do, which I'd recommend to everyone else also, is when you're setting up your Stacker News account, I paid attention to my bio in the sense that I put a little more in there than just the one line. And I don't know why I did, but I'm glad I did, because right from the beginning, I put in details about the fact that I'm retired, that I'm an attorney. I put down basically the story I just told you about how I failed to take the opportunity of buying Bitcoin in 2012. And immediately I got into a conversation with two or three different Stacker News people, some of whom I still interact with to this day. And that was day one. And that was a good thing, because immediately they generously gave me a few sats, which, by the way, I've tried to pass that along, and I always try to help out new people online, because it's so valuable for them to get involved in the conversation early on, and have the ability to post, to tip other people. I think that's an important thing. So yeah, that I'd say that the bio was a big help for me.
Yeah, and I've read through your bio, and also have links to full length blog posts that you've written on Stacker News, and one of them kind of talks a little bit about how Stacker News can be. It's this tool that you mentioned. Technically, you're like still trying to pick up some of the nuances of Bitcoin, and this, I think you mentioned using this as a tool to learn about Bitcoin. So it feels like you have a really um, the system you've set up for yourself. You can use Stacker News to learn about Bitcoin, and then as a result, because you're contributing and you're posting great content, you're then earning sats as well. So it's kind of you got a nice flywheel spinning there. How have you learned to kind of use Stacker News most effectively as a learning tool? Because I think there's a lot of people out there who want to know more about Bitcoin, don't quite know how to get started, but you seem to have, come across Stacker News at the right time and have kind of used it as a learning tool.
Um, you know, Kevin, there's so many things in that question. It's a great question. I just want to state, number one, Stacker News um, gives a new Bitcoin person access to brilliant minds, and that may sound corny in respect, but you can literally contact brilliant people who can teach you so much. And the generosity that I found on Stacker News was extraordinary. Now, I'll give you an example. If you go down the rabbit hole, you're going to immediately become aware of someone like Lynn Alden. Okay, now obviously people know her, and you know, brilliant when it comes to economics, her commitment to Bitcoin. You can learn so much from a person like that. Stacker News very early on did an AMA with Lynn Alden, where I could literally pick her brain, ask her. It was a little intimidating to actually be, dealing with some of these people, but I direct people to Lynn Alden's AMA as an example of the resources you can find on Stacker News. Now, it's not just her. You've got a lot of OG Bitcoiners on there. You've got Tony Giorgio, who engages people. He's on the cutting edge with Mutiny Wallet. He is participating. He published an article. I believe I think he did it on his Substack page, but then he mirrored it over to Stacker News the other day. And I mean, talking about learning about Lightning Network and the future of it. I mean, you've got access to some of the most intelligent minds in Bitcoin if you're interested, and you put in the time, you actually can have access to them and learn. Now, getting back to your point about how do you learn, I really feel that I didn't necessarily take this path, but if someone really wants to get interested in earning sats on Stacker News, the best way is really giving sats. Now, it sounds counterintuitive, of course. Everyone wants to make a great post and get 10,000 sats. But let's face it, that's not going to happen initially. You don't, know the environment, but you earn money by identifying quality posts. And there's only one way to learn what quality is, and that's to go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, basically. Some things that I liked at the beginning, were really irrelevant for people who are in the space. Often I recall falling down this rabbit hole myself once, where I would get into a race and decide, oh, Bitcoin Magazine just put out a new article. Let me post it this afternoon, which of course is, everyone else has seen it also. So it's sort of pointless. You know, People have already read the thing. So you have to learn to distinguish. That's my that would be the big part of it. And but the only way you're going to do that is by learning about Bitcoin and knowing what's good.
And yeah, that's a good point you made about there's a financial incentive to give sats for great content as well. Stacker News gives out a daily reward, and that reward is 100% of the revenue on the site, and it's blasted out every single day to people who are giving sats to other folks. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting kind of flywheel
Oh,
there.
it really is. And another, believe it or not, this sounds crazy. Another way I earned a lot of sats early on was I was completely confused about a particular issue. I had set up a lightning node. Um, that I had some trouble grasping the concept of balancing channels. Um, how the I know I'm not alone about that. The intricacies, and I would literally just ask a question in order to get an answer. And I remember one
Mm-hmm.
particular occasion where I asked what I thought was a dumb question, which probably was, but then three or four guys who knew a lot more than I did started arguing amongst themselves, and and
Right.
suddenly the post got some visibility. People began giving me sats because I started this insanity, which I really wasn't even qualified to participate in, if you follow me. And
Yeah.
I had a number of situations like that, just asking people for advice. And like I said earlier, there's a lot of generous people on Stacker News. When I say generous, not necessarily they are with their sats, but I mean with their time and with their knowledge. And take the time to write very detailed, intricate answers to your problems, and then you get input from five or six other people. And another way that I also began before I learned about actually posting, before I really got interested in posting original content, responding, commenting on things, which you get better at as you learn more about Bitcoin. Some of the sats, the most sats I earned back then were not on original posts, but on making comments on other people's posts. And
Mm-hmm.
that's another aspect that people don't realize. If you look at my profile, my bio, you can see that I've given away probably as many sats as I've earned, or I don't know the percentage, maybe, but a good chunk, maybe half. But my point is that was not purely out of selflessness and charity. And I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't do it intentionally, but I was just awarding people who were posting good content. And as a result, I was making more sats back without it even occurring to me.
That is really interesting. And I like that point you made as well about, not having to know everything to get started. I think there's a lot of people that when they approach a new topic and they feel like they don't know enough about it, they go, well, there's no way I can start creating content because I'm just new to this. I don't know what I'm talking about. I have to kind of sit back and read other people's stuff and just listen and just not say anything for a year or two until I really know what I'm talking about. But it's amazing that you can kind of have that same feeling on Stacker News, And if you just get outside of your comfort zone a little bit, ask those questions, even if they, do turn out to be a dumb question or whatever, it it can spur on debate. You have a financial incentive. It can reward you with sats. You learn a lot faster, and yeah, you have this tight knit community of Bitcoiners that are willing to answer questions as they come up. I'd love to hear a bit more about your experience trying to kind of learn more about Bitcoin prior to discovering Stacker News. Like, were you using, Twitter and Reddit or any other channels to try and get a better understanding of Bitcoin and some of the nuances of running a Lightning node and things like that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Kevin, for two reasons. Number one, I'll get to that, but also I just want to say that, as I said, I'm an older guy. I'm in my early 60s. I I never had that commitment to social media, that social networking that a lot of people have. Yes, I had, when I had my law practice, I had a Twitter account. I was on Facebook for years, but I got very disillusioned with that entire thing. Um, I, I I would go on Reddit in order to collect information on Bitcoin, but really my education began, and it's not unusual, I'm sure, is the Bitcoin Standard. I I
Mm-hmm.
I read just about every. I'm a reader. I'm a voracious reader, so I love books. So I think I have on my Noster blog stack. I think I have a list of Bitcoin books, which is one of my first posts, which doesn't have much to it. But I basically read all of the Bitcoin classics at one time or another. But I started with the Bitcoin Standard, and then what I did, and I still do this occasionally, is YouTube. Say what you want about Google, I'm not a big fan, but it really is an amazing resource where you can go back and watch old videos. Andreas Antonopoulos, back in 2013, he did a video. I think I posted it somewhere on Stacker News at one point. But you can learn so much from him about Bitcoin, and a lot of it was over my head, and a lot of it still is. But eventually, what I like to do is I'll collect videos from Adam Back. You've got so much. You've got so many great teachers out there that you can watch videos, you can read. Uh, Jameson Lopp has some amazing writing. His blog is outstanding. Matt Odell. I discovered all these people. Alan Farrington. I mean, these guys are great writers who really know Bitcoin too. So, I mean, Gigi. I discovered all of these people, but not necessarily through social media. And it was not until Stacker News uh, that I felt like the incentives were right. The people who Kian, I can't say enough about him. Brilliant guy with good instincts, but also very accessible. You want to ask him something, you just ask him on Stacker News, and you'll get an answer. Um, he's got good instincts. So anyway, I don't want to go off on a Stacker News, but I'm a fanboy of Stacker News, no question about that. But but no, I did not go there. I had a Twitter account. The toxicity of Bitcoin Twitter was, was annoying. And I remember Elon Musk. I don't know how many people remember this, but I think it was back in 2020, maybe, when he was doing the whole laser eyes. He put it on Twitter and then basically, you know, fell for the environmental mining FUD and basically started touting Dogecoin. Back then, but at that point, long before he was even making any noises about buying Twitter, I just had enough of all of that. And I would occasionally, I wouldn't post, but I would look in just to keep track of the Bitcoiners that I really like. Podcasts, another big, big thing for me. And what Bitcoin did, Peter McCormick started me. And Kevin, I started listening to your podcast early on. And each podcast
Amazing.
gives you little differences. Peter McCormick is much more of the everyman, pretending probably not to know less than he does. But it's very good for a new Bitcoiner because, things are explained as if you're a 5-year old on there. What I like about your podcast is you 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 have nuts and bolts guys on. These are people who are actually doing the work, the Lightning Network, creating products, which real real products that are going to be in the real world. You're not necessarily often out in the theoretical zone, but you have a very
Right.
good balance. Whereas I also listen to MVK's podcast. Yeah, I'm not sure if you ever listened to Bitcoin Review, and and
Yeah.
I love listening, but I am so far over my head after about 20 minutes when you've got those 3 or 4 guys chiming in on technical stuff that I have no idea what they're talking about. But for some reason I continue listening, and occasionally some stuff sinks in. Whereas I feel like yours is
Mhm.
is that kind of technical stuff is done on a more accessible level. So my point being, I'm not just here to talk about your podcast. My point is you can you can learn so many different things from podcasts that are coming from different directions. So I found that very valuable also.
Right. Yeah. I'd love to learn more about the kinds of content that having gone through this journey now of learning about Bitcoin, talking about it, spending a bunch of time on Stacker News, writing content, and then writing responses to other people's content. What what kind of content resonates the most on Stacker News? What have you found the most success with for other folks listening in that think to themselves, "Yeah, I'd like to try, learning about Bitcoin and earning some sats on Stacker News." Where can you kind of guide them in the direction of like the kinds of content or the frameworks you have for thinking about content that resonate most with other users?
Yeah. Yes. As far as content goes, and also as form goes, which I think is important, particularly in our day and age. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm writing an article, it's really I become obsessed with different things. Like as I told you before we went on air, I've done the switch recently to Graphene OS. Now I'm not a technical
Mm-hmm.
person. What I did was I took notes when I was making the transition because I knew a lot of people on Stacker News were interested in it, and there was so many people who could go so in depth about VPN dongles and not actually having cell phones tracking your whereabouts. I mean, things that I hadn't even considered when doing the transition. And so the bottom line is it's a learning thing for me, and I enjoy writing. And so I will literally start taking notes on whatever my new obsession is and putting in my
Mm-hmm.
screw ups, putting in my, I tend to tell, I want to know about other people's lives. I'll put in an anecdote if it's appropriate about my own childhood, my own life. And I think that, you get more of a connection with the reader when you do that. Okay, particularly now. I don't know if in the last few days in Stacker News there's been a flurry of bots, AI bots that are attempting to game the Stacker News, algorithms. I'm sure to earn money, and it strikes me as so obvious because it's not genuine. I mean, the sentences, yes, are all grammatically perfect, which mine are not always, but it's the authenticity and maybe walking a reader through your screw ups because there's a large percentage of Stacker News participants who are brilliant technical people who probably read my stuff and say, "What the hell is this guy doing?" But I also know there's a lot of people like me out there who are trying these things for the first time, who for whom I can give value describing my screw ups, my struggles, my workarounds, and I, I've it seems to they seem to like it because I do pretty well, in getting Sats awarded for that.
And I'm just pulling up your profile now here, and it shows on Stacker News the number of sats stacked for all the top kind of users. You're among the top, all the time, and it says right now over 500,000 sats you've stacked since joining Stacker News, and
Mhm.
I believe you said that was about a year ago. In the last month, you've stacked over 100,000 sats, 110,000 sats, and that is, I believe, the second. You're the second top stacker of the month behind Kian, who created Stacker News. So
Wow.
you're one of the most prolific stackers right now, and I'd love to understand your views on where sat stacking goes on Stacker News. Like, is this something that you expect? I know you said you're retired, and this is kind of, it strikes me as more of like a hobby for you, and you're kind
Right.
of like enjoying the process of learning and getting the benefit of sats in the meantime.
Exactly.
But is this something you see as like potentially an avenue for people to truly, either augment their income or like build an entirely new income stream from?
Yeah. I mean, I think about this, and you know, I I think about, when you look at Bitcoin, and you look at, who can really benefit from it right now. I always go to I think about the global South. I'm very interested in Anita Posh and her work, Alex Gladstein, and the unbanked, and I really believe that. Listen, I know it's difficult. If English is not your native language, you're going to have a tough time on Stacker News actually stacking sats
Mhm.
initially. But it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to learn English. But also, there's no reason why communities with different languages can't crop up. I know I see a significant number of Spanish Stacker News posts, but my point being this: the 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 techniques that I just outlined with regard to listening, learning. One other thing I didn't bring up is the trust algorithm, where if people trust you on Stacker News, your posts are going to be more visible. If you've
Mhm.
if you've posted good content, or if you've liked good content in the past, your your trust increases. So if you had someone, from a who wants to supplement their income with Stacker News, obviously at this point it would be much easier for someone in the global South, for whom the cost of living is much lower, and making $10 a day, $50 a week as a goal would really significantly impact their lifestyle. That's possible now, but it would take a lot of work. It's not a it's not the kind of thing. But building a Stacker News community, um, over the past year, I think when I joined, it was only there was no sub. Now you've got Meta, you've got Tech. You there are so many different ways that you can begin earning money on Stacker News right now. I'll give you an example, which is really only peripherally connected to Bitcoin. Is Gray Ruby has done this sort of tongue in cheek, co-opting every day off the Meta sub, because he's been pushing for a sports sub on Stacker News. Now
Right.
we are considering setting up a football pool where basically it's a gambling, informal. It's going to be it's not decentralized. It's not certainly not trustless. It's just a bunch of people who know each other having a little fun. And it's different. It's almost if you're in your office and you see the Super Bowl pool and buy a box. You know, but we're doing it here because we're developing a community that no, being a knowledgeable sports person may earn you sats in 10 years in Stacker News.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily tied to Bitcoin, but the beauty of that, I remember watching. I mean, I remember listening to Fiat Jeff talk about Noster and how he did not want Noster to be just a bunch of Bitcoiners sitting around talking about Bitcoin. And of course, naturally, that's sort of the way it started at the beginning. And that's where we're at. That's kind of where we're at right now in Stacker News. But I see the future being where the SAT is just the normal currency, and Stacker News could become a combined Craigslist. I really foresee a marketplace on Stacker News where you'd probably start with computer equipment. But you can literally, you can have people marketing coffee from Colombia to, people in Canada or the United States. You've got that, and clearly that would be certainly a way to develop revenue on Stacker News. And I
Mhm.
don't really understand. Here's where my technical limitations come in. I know Tian has ideas for decentralizing the site more. Um, so I don't know where it's going to be technically, but I think the sky's the limit when it comes. It doesn't have Stacker News does not have to be all about Bitcoin. I'm not saying it should start tomorrow, but I think I could see this as a gradual evolution.
Now, if you were to go back in time and start your Stacker News journey all over again, and let's say, you were approaching this from the angle of trying to maximize the number of sats that you earn,
Right.
would you be doing anything differently? Like what would, maybe some tactical advice here for folks who do want to come in and say, yeah, I want that extra 10, 20, $30 a week. I want to be able to earn a bit of extra money and learn. But the folks who are primarily approaching this through the lens of stacking, any tactical advice for them?
Yeah. Yeah. You know what I would do? I would that it's a very particular thing you could do. You could let's say you just signed up for Stacker News. Number one, I would put some information personal. Obviously nobody wants to dox themselves unless they don't care. And I'm not talking about someone who's running a business, but your generic user. I would put enough information in there to maybe start a conversation to start with. And then what I
Mm-hmm.
would do is I would look at that at the analytics. Stacker News is very good with analytics on the bottom of the page and start snooping around and see who are the successful stackers. Who are the ones who are at the top, who are earning the most. I would immediately go to those, focus on those people, and read their recent posts. If I see a recent post by one of those people, particularly if it's a long form content, which I really hope we see more of. I do it obviously. I'm trying to put out a new long form post once a week, maybe even twice a week, um, and not twice a week. I'm sorry, once every 2 weeks to once a week. But uh, find a post or a link they might do or a discussion, and focus on that particular post and read it and analyze it and comment intelligently on it by maybe connecting it to something else you might have read, um, bringing value to your comment. And you're going to get some visibility because of the status of the poster. Now you've engaged the poster. You might have pissed them off, which not is not necessarily a bad thing because you're going to attract attention and you may find people who agree with your point of view. And now you are and of course you number one, the first thing you do when you encounter this particular post is you give them some sats, because you know, odds are that people who have consistently posted good content, it would make sense to just go over there and just give every one of them 20 or 30 sats on their new posts, because they're going to have an audience. They're going to have people who appreciate it, and they're not likely to have posted crap. So that's a quick way to earn money. And then spend the time. That's the thing. I have a lot of people work. I'm retired. My wife and I just are taking life easy right now, and I just love hanging out on Stacker News. So it's a lot easier for me than it may be for other people. But that's a clear way to begin, and you don't have to write anything. You really don't need any special knowledge. You just use the resources that Stacker News gives you on the bottom of the page, and go through the stats and see who hunt around, see who the good stackers are.
Yeah, that's great advice. You just kind of like get to learn what has already succeeded, and then that can shape the decisions you make and the things you maybe want to talk about, or you can interact directly with the great posts on the site. I think that's a great way to approach this and to think about how someone might
And
want to
and
begin.
and it's not totally mercenary either, because what I discovered by doing that, and it sort of came naturally to me. What I wasn't counting on was how much I was learning.
Right.
And by reading this good content, you're learning it. You're learning to discern what the crap is and what the signal is. And it begins seeping into your brain. I wrote the whole thing about the zen of stacking sats. And like I said, it was meant to be a little amusing, but there was a lot of truth in that, in the sense that you the real way you're gonna do well on Stacker News is by learning more about Bitcoin, quite frankly,
Hmm.
and being able to discern what's good, and to talk about it, and to teach other people, and to put and to argue with people who are incorrect.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I'll make sure I link your profile in this episode so people can go check out some of your long form articles. You've written a number of them, and they're again listed right in your profile. So it's kind of like, it almost feels like when I go to your profile, it's almost like your Medium blog or something, but it's built into Stacker News. Your posts are all
Well,
natively written on Stacker News. It's very cool to see. And it's
well, you
the platform's kind of like, it feels like it's evolving to take on this ability to share long form content, which in the earliest days I don't think many people were doing. So very cool to see.
yeah, along those lines with my, I have to admit I stole that idea.
Okay.
This is why I'm saying it's a good thing to snoop around Stacker News. I don't know how to pronounce his username correctly, but I think it's Newt, or Nout.
Oh yeah.
I was strolling, I was just looking around, seeing original, who were the original posters of Stacker News. I'm interested in history, and I found a few posts. And if you look at his profile, it's fantastic, and that's what I modeled mine after. So in other words, you don't have to reinvent the wheel on Stacker News. If you there are very bright people on there who can give you great ideas,
Yeah.
and that's where I came up with that idea. That's a good example of how you can learn on Stacker News.
That's amazing. Yeah. And then, also just that final point here, I think that is important to make is you can start from day one without having, like, you don't have to have a bunch of Twitter followers, or you don't have to have this long history of being a writer or being a contributor somewhere else to have a voice. Whereas I think on something like a Twitter, you kind of do. You have to have a bit of a voice, or else the things you say just get lost. It's like no one's watching your profile, no one's tuning in, unless you happen to reply to someone and they retweet you and they have a larger audience. Like it's a real uphill battle to get your voice heard. But on Stacker News, there's this kind of like idea meritocracy, like the better ideas and the better questions and the better, you know, content rises to the top almost irrespective of like the person who posted it, right? It's just like anonymous accounts all the time will find, their posts on the top of the page. So very cool to see, and just a message to anyone who wants to contribute but fears they don't have an audience. I don't think that's as important on Stacking
It's
News as it is on other platforms.
very true. Very true. Yeah, and that's what I've enjoyed about it. The fact that you can, and like I said earlier, the accessibility to other people who are famous in their own right and maybe famous on Twitter, but they're just another account here on Stacker News.
Right. Yeah. And there's no like special privilege. And who knows, maybe some of these anonymous accounts that I, see on the top of the page, maybe they are famous people. Maybe we got Jack Dorsey or Michael Saylor or someone else just posting through an anonymous account to avoid attracting attention. Who knows?
Right. Who
Um,
knows? Yeah.
but this has been really informative. Thank you for taking the time to chat about your experience using Stacker News. It's amazing to see you've picked up over 500,000 sats. You've been contributing sats back to other people. It's really cool to see this kind of flywheel spinning. Yeah, my final message is just keep on stacking sats. I think it's really cool what you're doing, and I'll send people towards your profile to check out your future articles.
Thanks very much, Kevin.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye bye.